Hi, let me tell you a little story. In 2019, I went to watch Us, the new horror film by the one Jordan Peele. I could say I was mildly curious about it, because even though I enjoyed Get Out, I was excited to see what he would do next. The trailer sold us as a home invasion thriller, which is a genre that maybe I have fatigued or lost interest over time. I don't know, but I basically wasn't looking that forward to it. It did change a bit when the reviews came out and showed that he had another great movie in his hands. So I went to the theaters. The introduction was quite unsettling and well done, and I still remember the opening credits, showing those cages filled with rabbits while the camera pans out and this hunting choir sings. I got the vibe that maybe, just maybe, I was watching something different than I was initially expecting. So the movie progresses. We get the villains showing up at the protagonist's house, there's this whole confrontation, and then they rush to warn their neighbors. There, they meet the other doppelgangers, fight against them as well, and after all the insanity, this happens.
The boardwalk was getting ready to close and a bunch of us had just gotten out and we were going to our cars when the attack happened.
It's too early to say what exactly is unfolding, but it does appear we are in the midst of a brutal and terrifying attack by people who are being described as wearing red.
This seems to be a group of individuals engaged in some sort of demonstration or protest.
At this moment, I can still remember the gears in my brain shifting. Suddenly, this is not a horror movie about some weirdos invading someone's home. This is a full-blown nightmare that has taken over the entire country. I remember hunching forward on my chair, 100 questions popping in my head as the hair on the back of my neck raised up. What is going on? Is this some large-scale conspiracy? How in the heck are they gonna fight against all this? And as Adelaide found the mirror attraction and climbed down the stairs, I had a chill in my spine, waiting for the answers of this massive thing that, at least for me, she had no chance to fight against. And the answers came, and I was mostly satisfied. The twists in this movie that initially felt forced, in a rewatch actually served to enhance the narrative and themes. Us, for me, is a borderline masterpiece, and the one that made me fully jump on the Jordan Peele hype train. But that's not what I want to talk about. The reason why I'm mentioning all this is because throughout all these years, I've been trying to understand what was there about that news report scene that stuck in my head so much. What was in that little twist that made me go from liking this movie to outright being enraptured by it? Cut to 2020, and I know this is a long intro, I understand that, but please stick with me for now because I feel like once I'm able to draw these two examples, it's gonna be easier for me to illustrate the subject of the video itself. Cool? Cool. Where was I again? Oh yeah, right, 2020. It's almost the end of the year, and a YouTuber that I follow, and probably some of you know about, Chris Stuckman, makes a video talking about this film called The Empty Man, saying it deserved a cult following. The movie had an abysmal box office and was trashed by critics. I wasn't even gonna watch it, but he made such compelling arguments that made me reconsider it. And so I did. This movie starts with a 20-minute prologue in Ura Valley, Bhutan, before showing off its opening titles and cutting all the way to Missouri, where we follow this detective as he starts investigating the disappearance of this girl who is involved in this weird ritual that has taken over high schoolers in that small town, a ritual to summon the Empty Man. But there's this chunk in the second act where the detective stumbles upon this institute that claims to have connections to the Empty Man, and as he investigates them, he starts to go down this bizarre rabbit hole. And I clearly remember that feeling, the same one that I had in Us, creeping again on the back of my mind. As our protagonist continues to go deeper in this massive cult-like conspiracy, and the scope of the story and the lore just grows and grows, I'm getting more and more engrossed, asking that same question. How the hell is he gonna face off against all that? Just like Us, this movie switched from being a Slender Man lookalike to becoming something way more sinister and larger in scale. I felt like I needed a term to describe this genre that I created, so I settled with the name Grand Horror. What is Grand Horror, you might ask? Well, it's a subgenre inside horror that deals with bigger themes and scope, that its antagonistic forces are way larger than a ghost or a monster. and that it's a kind of story that needs a bigger budget to be fully realized. Now, you might be listening to my explanation and thinking, isn't this just cosmic horror? And you wouldn't be exactly wrong. Cosmic horror, after all, is about the unknowable, the dread that comes with facing something so big and incomprehensible that could literally make you insane just bearing witness to it. Again, I see where a lot of people see the similarities, but where the essence of cosmic horror is in exploring the psychological and philosophical ideas that surround these big themes, Grand horror is broader in that aspect, being more focused on the scale and scope of the story first and foremost. I feel like a good way to differentiate both would be to say that every grand horror story is in some way cosmic horror, but not every cosmic horror is grand horror. Does that make sense? Cool? Cool. Well, let's talk about why this genre is so fucking great. One of the first things that make this type of story so alluring to me is the ambition, because as much as anyone else, I love a good horror film. I mean, for fuck's sake, I think Hereditary, for example, is probably one of the best films of the decade. But there's always this limitation of where the story can go. It's either a curse that's passed from generation to generation, a house that's haunted by a vengeful ghost, a family that's dealing with a possession of sorts, or a monster that has been scaring the nearby town/forest/pick your location. But not with grand horror. With it, the protagonist is dealing with this bigger force, like for example, a government experiment that goes wrong and years later comes back to hunt the entire country. And there's something incredibly compelling about that for me. You get to a haunted house, for example, and discover there is a ghost there. For all the tropes and movies we had about that, we kinda have an idea of what to do. You can deal with that by leaving the house, doing an exorcism, or just fighting where the source of that ghost's hatred is. But what do you do when you have a cult that worships this creepy entity, and you're not only being targeted by them, but you can feel it slowly getting closer and closer to you? How do you deal with that? And that question for me is so fucking amazing. Because it taps into our fear of being powerless, of being surrounded by this massive thing that you know have insidious intentions and it's bigger than you. It's attacking other people, affecting entire cities or even countries, and at every turn, you're just wondering, how deep does it all go? By the way, I'm mentioning these two films a lot because they are indeed the best examples I could pick, but there are other movies that dip into the same subgenre, even if not completely. Jacob's Ladder, for example, is a fantastic psychological horror, but when the second act kicks in, the movie starts to shift into this conspiracy thriller of sorts, and it gets pretty unnerving, especially as the layers of sad conspiracy begin to peel off, and Jacob starts to lose his fucking mind, causing the whole plot to get more and more unpredictable as it goes along. Another great example is Cloverfield, which I do agree it veers more towards action. But the way the movie is framed as a found footage grounds the audience in a scary way. You're watching these big events play out from the eyes of these ordinary citizens, an alien invasion that feels too realistic at times. And their powerlessness, mixed together with the utter confusion and chaos of the situation, kinda gave me the same vibe as all the movies mentioned above. So after throwing so much praise at this genre, one question remains. Why the hell don't we have more of it? For me to answer this question, we need to look at how Hollywood sees horror as a genre. Because, unfortunately, there is still this niche stamp over it. Not that it's bad or underground, I mean just look at its box office. But like it or not, the genre has always thrived with smaller budgets. And it's as they say, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Just as an example, C. Robert Cargill, the writer of Sinister and Doctor Strange, and definitely one of the strongest horror writers working nowadays, was asked during a Reddit AMA what would he do if he was a newbie screenwriter trying to break into the industry in 2021. And he answered by saying he would write a great spec, with lower budget, thoughtful, character-drenched horror, and workshop it until it gave his friends nightmare. And he goes on to describe about the big market for horror films. So as you can see, this has been the status quo for a while. There's a lot of interest in horror movies, just not big budgeted ones. When you add to the equation that horror is still a genre that some people are really not a fan of, and that a bigger budget means a higher risk that may or may not pay off. See The Empty Man, for example. The writing is kinda on the wall, for now at least. Do I think it's gonna stay that way? Maybe not. You have, for example, Nope, the newest horror film by the one Jordan Peele, which is being marketed as a big budget feature, so much that it's gonna have scenes shot in IMAX, so there seems to be some willingness to bet on these bigger horror films. Let's just hope the door stays open for more. And let me know what y'all think. Does anything that I said made sense, or does it all sound like a bunch of dog shit? Do you have any films that you would consider grand horror that I might have missed? Fire in the comments below, and see you next time.